Very welcome.
Excellent, thank you. Let me know when it's okay to share my screen.
Sure, go ahead.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I hope you can all see that. First of all, as tomorrow's St. Patrick's Day, happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. It's certainly a day I normally like to spend in Ireland, but it's slightly different this year. So my name's Alice Charles from the World Economic Forum, and what I'm going to be doing today is just taking you through some of the emerging trends in relation to cities and their recovery strategies. And I guess we're 1 year into this crisis, certainly in the European context. And since the onset of this crisis, we've seen huge changes within our cities. One of the immediate things that we've seen in cities right around the world was this move towards walking and cycling, so mass sustainable mobility. So we've seen our footpaths being widened to allow us to walk and maintain social distancing. We've seen our roadways being given over to cycle paths. But at the same time, we've seen this move away from public transit, mass public transit, like underground systems, for example, and indeed buses, because people had this fear that they would catch COVID-19 on public transit, despite the fact there isn't actually evidence to suggest that that is where people are picking up COVID-19. So one of the critical questions that cities are asking themselves as they come out, we hope come out of COVID-19, is how might cities enable more people to use sustainable transport modes whilst maintaining social distancing? And of course, a huge part of that is getting people back on mass public transit as well as walking and cycling. The other thing we have seen is this huge shift towards the virtual delivery of services, and whether that's through healthcare or through our school systems or through our university systems, we are seeing services being delivered. And of course, we're all carrying out our business activities online. So in that context, cities are increasingly asking themselves, how do we shift our services to virtual delivery as well, and also maintain the infrastructure for that? Another thing, as Tig rightly pointed to earlier, is there has been this huge issue with isolation intensifying mental health challenges. And as cities start to emerge from the crisis, they're thinking about how might we design our cities and our buildings to try and ensure that we're designing for mental health. And a part of that, of course, is access to green space. But another part of that is thinking about how we lay out our buildings in a different way and how we create healthy and well buildings. So questions cities are asking themselves is, how might we support connection during a time of social distancing, but also design our buildings and cities for good mental health? The other thing we have seen is innovation has flourished. So I guess what we have seen is cities and countries being able to leverage their local sort of entrepreneurial spirit to come up with solutions to their unique challenges. And in that context, cities are thinking, how might we involve those who are entrepreneurs in solving some of the novel challenges that we face within our cities. And I think that's really important. Dublin in the past has opened up its data, which has brought in the SME sector to try and think about solving some of their unique challenges. So in that context, what we are seeing in cities is the top issues and sort of focus areas for cities are around how might cities enable existing industries and businesses to transform and remain viable? And that's particularly in relation to retail. And if we have time, I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail later on, but also in relation to hospitality and leisure. How might cities encourage new industries and businesses to emerge and thrive in the city, particularly in, for example, the green sector or indeed in the digital sector? How might cities support changing urban land use and infrastructure and space needs? That will be particularly critical in the central business district, but also thinking about how we can encourage the move, as Melbourne would often call it, from tar to green, for example, to have more green space within our cities. How might cities accelerate our digital infrastructure whilst maintaining our ethics and privacy? Because we do need digital infrastructure to enable us to work in a virtual world, whilst we won't be working in that world all of the time. And how might cities understand the implications of systems change and what that might mean for governments and democracy? And how might cities maintain and develop a focus on community cohesion, mental health, and identity? So I guess there's cross-cutting priorities here in relation to social equity, in relation to climate change, in relation to resilience, and in relation to prosperity. So that's very much what cities are thinking about in terms of their recovery. I guess in relation to climate, it means we've got to have mass renovation of our buildings. First of all, it's good for climate, but second of all, it actually leads to a jobs-led recovery. We know that a huge amount of jobs can be created in retrofitting our building stock. But it also means we need to decarbonize our electricity grid infrastructure, and we need to digitalize our electricity grid infrastructure. It also means investment in mass transit, investment in our aging water systems, and conversion to the circular economy system. So we're looking at waste as a resource and looking at how we can reuse it, recycle it, and upcycle it. But it also has shown, COVID-19 has shown huge inequalities in our cities. And the reality was those inequalities existed before. This has just managed to shine a light on those inequalities. So in terms of a recovery, that recovery needs to be just. You know, I find it remarkable when I look at the number of ICU beds per head of population between Germany and Ireland, for example. If I look at Germany, it's 29 per 100,000 of population. If I look at Ireland, it's 5. So we need to have equity in the delivery of healthcare systems, and that's something that we will need our cities to actively look at post-COVID-19. But also, we had an affordable housing crisis before COVID-19. But unfortunately, that crisis is going to be even greater post-COVID-19. The reality is when people lose their jobs, people need access to social and affordable housing. So the demand will increase. So governments need to build. There's no other way about it. Governments need to build housing. Also, in relation to education, we have seen huge regressions because people have had huge gaps in their education. So we will need to have more tailored programs to ensure that people can get back on track in relation to their education program. We also will need a whole of government approach to the delivery of services. And the Mayor of Helsinki often talks about we need to focus on the delivery of functional services within our city. And that's something that all cities will need to focus on. But also we will need to reinvigorate cultural facilities and the arts, which have really suffered during the COVID-19 crisis. To underpin this recovery, we need 5G infrastructure. We need to leverage the Internet of Things. It's very much an enabler, for example, in digitalizing our buildings and in the retrofit of our buildings. We also will need real-time information which citizens can leverage, whether it's for health or transport, for example, but we need to ensure end-to-end security. We've seen how cities like Atlanta in the last couple of years have been brought to their knees because of cyber attacks. So our cities need to be set up to be secure. I guess some of the solutions that's been thought about from a cities related perspective, one is the Paris 15-minute city concept. To be honest, it's not new, and I'll come to that in a second. And it's about everything that we need to live, work, and play is within 15 minutes of where we live. However, Melbourne has been working on this for a very long time through their 20-minute neighborhood. And, you know, it's constantly regarded as one of the most livable cities in the world. And that's because this is their strategy. So in that context, what they're looking at is that within 20 minutes of where we live, we're able to walk, we're able to cycle, we're able to use public transit, we are able to access jobs, we're able to access wider shopping facilities, for example, health facilities, schools, lifelong learning, play facilities, green streets, community gardens, and sports facilities. But in terms of our housing, there's diversity in housing, and there's also the ability to age in place, and there's affordable options. Unfortunately, I often say in Ireland, there's far too much apartheid housing, where the social housing is provided in one part of the city and you see other housing provided in other parts of the city, and that does not create sustainable or balanced communities. I guess some of the wider strategies that we're seeing, for example, C40 has set up a Green and Just Recovery Task Force, which is chaired by the Mayor of Milan. They're working with 97 of the leading cities in the world to focus on addressing climate change. But the mayors of those 97 cities have adopted a set of principles. Unfortunately, Ireland is not at the table here. There's no Irish city involved in C40. But in terms of the principles that they have signed up to, they have said that they do not want to return to business as usual. They want to rely on science in terms of informing the recovery. They want to provide excellent public services. They want the recovery to be just. And they also want to embrace resilience in their recovery. They want to leverage the latest innovation and technology. And they want the recovery to be healthy, and equitable, but also to ensure that national government is supporting cities and investing in cities to drive this recovery, but also to ensure that international and regional institutions invest directly into cities. We at the World Economic Forum are doing a number of things in this regard. And one is our Net Zero Carbon Cities initiative. And this is a report that we launched very recently, which is very much putting forward this vision for an integrated approach where we decarbonize our electricity grid infrastructure, digitalize our electricity grid infrastructure, decarbonize mobility, create ultra efficient buildings, and also many other benefits that result from that. We're also, and this afternoon I'm speaking at the IADB, the Inter-American Development Bank City Summit with the President of Colombia to launch our Biodiverse Cities Initiative, which is going to be focused on creating biodiversity in cities around the world. However, I do have to say that cities have been severely financially impacted by COVID-19. And one example I'm showing here is the city of New York, which budget deficit last year was more than 8 billion. So in that context, we've seen cities losing revenue from public transit systems, from, for example, their toll charge systems, their local property tax, etc. So all of that makes it very difficult for a city to lead in terms of the recovery. They will need to work with banking institutions, for example, national government, etc., and of course multilateral development banks like the European Investment Bank to get the finance to deliver their recovery. So I'm going to stop there. We don't have time to go into real estate, but I'm happy to take questions in relation to that later on. Thank you.
And thanks so much, Alice. I think it's really telling how social justice and resolving issues of inequality are foremost on the agenda now, as a result of COVID-19 lockdowns and the challenges to healthcare. I also have to say, it's telling that you're seeing the opportunity in this, and I think that perhaps speaks to an Irish optimism. So where there are words, there's hope, and you've certainly given us hope there. How would you foresee that Ireland as a country, and perhaps even down to the group of researchers here collaborating together, can be at the forefront of that shared mission?
So I think, one of the things I often say when I speak in Ireland is that there's an international world of city diplomacy, and Ireland's not at the table. So I think the very first thing is, and that's probably because you don't have elected local mayors. That's probably part of it. But that, withstanding that particular issue, you do see Belfast engaged, and it's got a chief executive running the city. You do see Glasgow engaged, and it's a similar sort of situation. So I think one of the things that we really need to encourage cities in Ireland to do is to get involved in international city networks. So, and why do they do that? Why do cities get involved in international city networks? Because they share their problems and they hear solutions from others. And yes, the context is different, but the solutions can be tailored to the local context. So I think that's critically important to understand what's going on to make your city competitive. And the other thing is, I sit on the City of Belfast Commission for Innovation and Inclusive Growth. And that is very much borrowing from the likes of Pittsburgh, where they set up a task force to help the city come up with a long-term vision for the delivery of infrastructure and services. In the case of Belfast, we're very much focused on its net zero carbon future. And that includes the vice chancellors of the universities, the leaders of business. It includes the leaders of the NGOs that need to be involved, the critical government organizations, and international folks like myself who are helping to inform an overall vision for the city. I think that that's good practice. It's not just Pittsburgh and Belfast that have used it, but many other cities have used a similar strategy. So I think that's good practice. The other thing in terms of government, government has got to lead the charge on building social and affordable housing. There's no way out of it. They've got to do it. And also in that regard, I think there's an opportunity for them to lead in renovating their existing building stock that they own. But the other powers that cities and governments have in Ireland is to create policy that will drive the net zero carbon agenda at all levels of government. And finally, government has got wider soft power in terms of brokerage, being prepared to bring the stakeholders to the table who need to work together if you're going to create a net zero carbon Ireland in the future. And you know, a perfect example is if you're going to decarbonize your electricity grid infrastructure, broker the entities, ESB of course is one of them, that need to work together, as well as the financing systems, you know, the international investors, the MDBs that need to be at the table to help create the financing landscape for investing in net zero carbon infrastructure. So, and I'm using the electricity grid infrastructure as an example, but the same is true for buildings, right? Because government owns some buildings, but then a lot of them are owned by commercial real estate operators, for example, or universities, or etc. So they have to use their convening and brokerage power as well to drive a net zero carbon future.
I mean, there's a really interesting point you've made here, which is about the democratization of cities. And Ireland has not been leading in this area, but we all know that Limerick in 2022 would have an independently elected mayoral position, which, you know, could be the pivot point that we need. And I really thank you for your time and your insights. There's a question from Seán McQuaid from Horizon New in the chat. So if you could address that, that would be great. And I'll just give you a moment to have a quick look. It's in the Q&A.
Oh, sorry, missed that.
You're good. So I'm interested also in this integration of technology into the city, you know, which is quite a paradox, you know, to support inclusion, to support renaturing cities, so that, you know, turns out technology will be a driver, which I think is something not everybody can really get their head around yet.
So I think that's a really good point, and thanks for the question, Siobhan, as well. So at the World Economic Forum, we have a think tank called the Global Future Council on Cities of Tomorrow, and it's, you know, it includes leading mayors and senior civil servants from cities, academics, business leaders, and wider civil society. And they're very much focused on driving a green and just recovery in cities. And they have 4 task forces. One is on climate and resilience, one is on social infrastructure and inclusion, one is on enabling digital infrastructure, and one is on city revenue and finance. But returning to the enabling digital infrastructure task force, I guess what they're very much focused on is making sure that they're looking at the enabling technology that's required to drive a green and just recovery. I think there's vital lessons that cities need to learn from the smart cities movement, which has been around for 15 years and largely hasn't got to scale. So the reason it hasn't got to scale is, you know, there was a focus on widgets and gadgets rather than what are the outcomes that need to be delivered for citizens, but what are the outcomes that also need to be delivered to enable the city to operate more efficiently. And certainly I think what's happening right now is there's an outcomes based focus on the delivery of technology. So rather than think of the application front, you're thinking of what is the problem we're seeking to solve, and then what is the role of technology as an enabler within that. And that's the approach that I would encourage, because what we've ended up in the smart cities movement is a plethora of pilot projects that are failing at the first phase. About 75% of them you know, fail at the pilot stage, and they're not getting to scale and they're not being replicated.
Yeah, and look, thanks so much for sharing your insights into the process. It turns out something we'll come back to later is there was a presentation at World Economic Forum on virtual reality as being a tool by which we can change or win hearts and minds about new paradigm shifts for cities. So I think it's really interesting. Probably our first stop for innovation to be looking at WEF. You did mention the role of government, and I really thank you for your input, Alice, and appreciate your contribution to GoGreenRoutes again in the future. We're going to introduce, you highlighted the role of government. I can't speak to government, we can talk to parliamentarian. So we have our MEP from Munster, which is MEP Seán Kelly. So Seán Kelly has been an MEP since 2009. He's had an extraordinary career, a background in education, like many of us here on the call, but he went on to be Untitled of president of the GAA, that's our national game here, and led the GAA through a watershed moment in terms of inclusion across different sports, opening up access to our national stadium, essentially creating a new agenda, open and inclusive agenda for that sport, which as those of us who live in Ireland know that that sport has a foothold in not just every parish in the country, but perhaps in every field. And Seán has been a strong advocate on sport and physical activity for health and well-being, and is very much at the forefront of the climate change agenda in the European Parliament. So we're going to go over to you now, Seán, if that's okay. Seán,
sorry, we can't hear you at the moment. I think you might have the mute on still.
Now, can you see me and hear me?
We can indeed.
Yes, we can.
August Alice, August Nullig, or Law on the Fording Divilig. So it's a pleasure to be here and to give an overview of the funding from European Union, in particular in relation to environmental and green and climate matters. So from the first slide, you will see that we have a 1.8 trillion budget. Some of that is traditional in the sense that there's a 7-year budget every 7 years. That's 1.07 billion. But this year it was added to by Next Generation EU, 750 billion, 390 in grants and 360 in loans. And thanks to the German presidency of the European Council, Angela Merkel and colleagues got that over the line, because the frugal four, as you might recall, were against a lot of that. But it's now there, and that's what's going to be activated over the next 7 years. So that's the first slide. Then we move on to how it's divided up and who's getting what. So you can see there that some of it is under Next Generation EU, some of it is under the MFF, the 7-year budget, but you can see that most of Next Generation EU is recovery and resilience facility. And then there is REACT EU, which of course is to react to the COVID-19 and get the stimulus going for the renewal of the economy. And then you have things like rural development and just transition, because there is a determination that nobody will be left behind. And that can happen, of course, when you transition away from coal and, as we see in Ireland, peat-fired power stations and the effect on the local area. Invest EU, which is very important for getting the confidence going and businesses holding on to them in case they were going to go to business, but also to help new ones to come forward. And then you have Horizon Europe, which is a major research area in Europe, which is hugely important as well. So mainly, though, the emphasis now is on climate change. 30% of the EU budget has to be spent to fight climate change, and 20% of Next Generation EU is in the digital. So you go nowhere in Europe now unless you have something to do with digital and green, and rightly so. So then we move on to the next slide, the long-term budget, and there you'll see that an awful lot of it is to what we call the LIFE project too. That's in relation to nature resources and environment, and the building up other areas as well, which is hugely important. Sustainable agriculture, maritime, again, very important. And again, climate action, environmental protection, food security, and rural development. All those are hugely important. But the LIFE program is the used funding instrument for the environment and climate action. That has to do with, obviously, finances, projects to do with nature, water, air, climate change mitigation, adaptation to improve the EU quality of life. So that's hugely important. And I mentioned already the Just Transition Fund to ensure that nobody is left behind. So there you have under heading 1, you have the single market, innovation and digital. I mentioned that again. That's again, huge emphasis on that now. Investments in research and innovation, digital transformation, and of course, the perennial task of completing the single market. And then, of course, then the involving SMEs, because SMEs are the majority of our companies. Sometimes we don't think so, but they actually are. So there's again a huge emphasis on trying to help them, especially post COVID. So then we go on to a very important little graph here, because it shows in some respects how the European Parliament can be effective. Sometimes people think they're not that effective, that the Commission and the Council have all the say over the budget. But here are areas where the European Parliament insisted on priorities and got more money for it. You can see Horizon Europe, which is hugely important, the next to 4 billion. Invest EU, which I was a rapporteur for myself, next to billion. EU for health. That all came about because of COVID and the need to pull things together and do things at European level rather than at member state level, especially in cooperation. Next to 3.4 billion there. And Erasmus, which is hugely important for education institutions, students again. We saw the benefit there, 2.2 billion. And unfortunately, the United Kingdom were offered to continue part of that and they refused. And then you have, of course, the other areas there, which would be all little additions to create more Europe generally. So now I'll go on, I'll have a look at Horizon Europe, which is hugely important because this is where the research is done and where the funding comes for it. So we at European Parliament level wanted this to be bigger. There was a target of 3% of GDP for research, but we haven't met that. We are improving, but we're a bit off it all the time. But nevertheless, a budget of 100 billion isn't bad, and a lot can be done with it to deliver for citizens' priorities and to boost innovation, etc., and obviously leading to jobs and competitiveness in Europe all through the European research area. So that's the key research one. And then the divide up there of Horizon Europe, the different areas it goes to. There's no need to go into too much detail. You can see there yourselves all the headings: health, culture, civil security, climate again, energy, hugely important, of course, food, the bioeconomy, etc. So an example there of how Ireland got involved in that, the Cork City Council got involved in a project under Horizon 2020, a Grow Smarter project. We teamed up with cities like Stockholm, Cologne, Barcelona, and Alice was talking there about our lack of engagement, and she's absolutely right. This is just one example, but there could be many more, and needs to be many more. And I think there is a small little tendency in Ireland to keep away from some of these things because we maybe don't like comparisons that don't reflect that favorably on us. But by getting involved, we can actually improve immensely. And I would completely agree with Alice that we need to improve in that area. And the idea of a Limerick elected mayor might kickstart that whole prospect, because being isolated and telling us how great we are ourselves doesn't always bear comparison when we look at the figures. Now, move on then to the LIFE program. There you can see yourselves again. 5.4 billion in current prices for the LIFE programme. That's an increase of almost 60%. Again, that's of course very important because this is a priority to support nature, water, air, waste, climate change, etc. So this again is very important, and the integrated projects with member states. And again, integration is very important there because Alice's point, and I concur completely, we do far better together and far more effective and get better bang for our buck by pooling resources than by individual councils or even member states doing things where they can pretend they're mighty, but if you look at the comparisons, they mightn't be that mighty at all. So that whole trend has to change, and that's what this is about, encouraging that. Then we come to what I mentioned earlier, Erasmus and Erasmus Plus. This is very important. It has helped so many thousands of students, and Ireland has been very good now at this area. Our students have been good. Some of our educational institutions, including your own, Ty, have been good in encouraging pupils and facilitating them to study abroad, and of course facilitating students from the continent to study in Ireland. And of course, now that the United Kingdom have left Erasmus, there's going to be a big opportunity for Irish third-level institutions to attract students who might have otherwise gone to the UK and won't now be going there because they won't get the funding, which is pretty substantial, €250 a month to help them. And of course, also job opportunities and better qualifications, etc. So there you have an example of work there being done under the SHIP project with Louth and Meath through the LEOs, and again, huge room for more of that. So then we move on to the next one, InvestEU. There are the various categories: sustainable infrastructure, 9.9 billion, research and innovation, again, I said that, and digitization, again, all the emphasis there. SMEs, of course, which I mentioned, and then some of the points that were mentioned by Alice, social investment in skills, because we do need to think of everybody, and that's a very important point there. But InvestEU is the successor to what they call the Juncker Fund, and FC was known as, I was very much involved in that. It was a huge success. It generated 500 billion in investment when people thought it would be a failure, and it created 1.4 million jobs. We expect even more from InvestEU, especially now post-COVID, when we really get going. Then another little point, which is emphasised, obviously, InvestEU do no significant harm principle, and that then is how things are assessed, and then eventually funding drawn down, because who wants to do harm? Nobody. But they can sometimes, if the wrong projects are finalised or they aren't checked for their suitability, maybe in terms of the green agenda and digitalisation, etc. So again, that's a very important area. Then there's a little date down there on Ireland and Horizon. Now, Alice will probably be interested in this. We are reasonably good, but not as good as we should be. And that's again because probably of not enough direction at central level, not enough direction at council level. Some institutions excellent at cooperating, others haven't got up to the mark yet. We are getting there, but not as good as we should. And if it was a school report for a student, you'd be putting down here a lot of potential, but can do better. So again, look at the final figure there. Participation 14 out of 28 for Ireland, not really great. For a country that's in the European Union for 50 years now nearly, and the same budget share rank. So I think I would like to see a lot more emphasis being put. And again, government has a lot to do here. So hopefully we can encourage that. And I think by creating a department for higher education and a minister for higher education, etc., I think we can see and hopefully a big improvement in that area. And I know, Ty, being a third level professor yourself, you would like to see that happening. Now we come to innovation, which again we like to talk about, but how great are we? Reasonable. We're ranked good in terms of being compliant and looking for progress and all that area, but again, 19 out of 28 is nothing really to be boasting about in terms of intensity. So again, there, and these figures are very important because we've got to get these across. But I already had a meeting with new Minister Simon Harris on some of these issues, so they are aware of it. And now that, as I said, there's a dedicated department, the universities and the third level institutions won't have to be leading everything because they haven't the resources, number one, and secondly, they wouldn't have probably the time or the clout to do so. But there we have the opportunity now, and we're getting the message. So that would be important. So then finally come to where we're at. Ireland, some of the EU funding in Ireland, eventually a lot of this will be online. There's a lot of resources there. Transparency of EU funding is imperative, and it is there and done. There's no hiding. It's all there for people to look at the various streams and see what's available and what's been drawn down. So that's 2019 example of seeing some EU funding in Ireland. You can see it there. So we did do well in some areas, but again, we can improve. But of course, one thing you do learn is that once you get institutions or businesses cooperating in relation to funding, once they get the hang of it, they get good at drawing it down, and they look out for other areas where they can work on, and they look at the trends in Europe. And as I said, it's all now about climate change and digitalization. So ticking those boxes would put you in a big advantage if you want to draw down funding and create something that's of value, not just to your own area, but to Europe generally and the overall targets. So there you have at the very end then some top organizations which have drawn a lot of funding. You can see there. Others maybe might come on board, and in due course there will be plenty of opportunities. And then we compare ourselves to other countries. United Kingdom was pretty strong there. We've close ties with them. That might continue post-Brexit. Maybe they won't be probably leading as much, but they can still participate, and that would be a good thing. So again, there, I think we will see a big improvement in Ireland's position, hopefully now over the next 7 years. So that's generally the overall position. The budget is there. The various categories are outlined. The way to do business is outlined. Getting the partnerships together is going to be important. So the same message, I suppose, eventually as Alice, go Europe and you won't go wrong. Thank you very much, Ty. Good morning.
Thanks so much, Seán. I just put one point to you. I know that your own background, your rural background, is kind of juxtaposed with your life as a European living on the continent for work and traveling to Dublin a lot. So, what was it that highlighted climate change as a key issue for you? Was it the Paris Accord? Was it the careers of your kids and their future? Just as somebody from your sporting background as well as your political status, was there a particular tipping point for you, Cara, that
there were a number?
Opened your eyes?
I became aware of the decline in biodiversity in Ireland from various reports. I saw reports about water quality, and then I came to Europe and I got involved in energy, and I was appointed to represent the Parliament and to draw up some of the proposals for the Paris Agreement. But also side by side with that, and this was the real tipping point, when I saw Ireland were doing so poorly in relation to their 2020 commitments. And secondly, Ty, I was almost, I have to say, embarrassed when I saw ministers, etc., making excuses, running over to Europe and say, oh, listen, we're poor old Ireland, we had a crisis in the financial sector. Don't make us meet our climate targets for the moment. I thought that was absolutely putrid, quite frankly. And I said, we must change this. And side by side with that in time, we were selling our products as a green emerald isle. And it was a complete and utter contradiction. So I want that message to get out loud and clear. That nonsense has to stop. And we have to be seen to be green. environmentally friendly, be up there with the best, have proper buildings that are not too intensive in terms of carbon footprint, and reduce our carbon footprint, and stop saying because other countries are worse than us that we should be able to continue as we are. We have targets for 2030. The government had better meet them and start doing so right now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Seán. It's a hugely important message, and honestly, I have to say it's the reason why we work here with yourself closely over the years, and you've been a great supporter of our projects, and with MEPs, because Kieran Cuff is also linked to our project, and I think it's also because you're willing to call out the status or inertia which happens at home, and you're not locked into that agenda. So look, it's refreshing to hear your personal voice as well as highlighting the roles of that funding. And we've tried to describe what we've done in terms of funding, and I think it's not inaccurate to say out of about 300 million spent on the specific area called nature-based solutions, we're probably hitting about 7% of it. So in some areas, I think we have strength, and given the day that's in it and the week that's in it, Ninarka Kerla Kayla, so working together, we have the capacity to strengthen that. And I also share the optimism that both yourself and Alice have, because I think it's important we see these challenges as opportunities, and that's where I think the just transition has a major role in Ireland. And Alice is obviously almost quantifying some of these problems as opportunities for new jobs. And look, I think it's important to hear both your voices here today. And Lou, we look forward to meeting you in Brussels when we can have discussions about how we can not just succeed in funding, but to optimize the impact of our project so we can influence policy. So we look forward to meeting you both on the island and in Brussels beyond the challenge of today. And thanks to both Alice and Seán for your invaluable time. It's a pleasure to have both of you here. Thank you.
Alice, Ashling. Thank you.
Thanks, Seán.
Thanks so much. So look, thanks to our learned speakers. It's an honor and a pleasure to have such expertise at hand. And this is, this is a really important part of our project, is hearing other voices. Now, the voices today we have belong not just to GoGreenRoutes, which is a project which evolved out of Limerick with 39 partners, now is situated at Maynooth University with 40 partners. What we find extraordinary is, I can say as a scientific coordinator, I didn't get here alone. I get here on basis of conversations with Seán and others, with Marcus as a mentor, with Giovanna and many other researchers, and Aoife, who've helped us build our mode of inquiry. So look, I'm a psychologist, and my mode of inquiry would have been quite narrow, certainly 10 years ago, and now it's much broader. And our mode of inquiry is the methods we can bring, and the thought processes we can bring and instill in a project idea. So my learning is that there's not a distillation of our ideas, but actually simply a broadening. And I think, Erasmus was mentioned earlier. It's no surprise to me that many of the people that co-wrote our original proposal, other than the WP leads, would have been students that are on Erasmus that then got hired as research associates. So there is an interesting, I think, role of diaspora and culture there. So Ashling also, who's our project manager, has worked extensively in the UK and overseas. And I think the one issue about growing up in a small island is we need to get off it. And when we get off it, that gives us a capacity to influence the world a little bit more, and also see, as Seán Kelly MEP pointed out, you know, what are the numbers, what are the perspectives, what's really the difference is between here and overseas, and how can we learn and how can they learn from us? In other words, how can we all shape a better world together? I know there was a question about citizen science, and I didn't address it, partly because Marcus Collier is working on engaged citizen science with some other partners in our project, and Marcus's new project is very much focused on this, called NovelECO, which is an ECR award. So Aisling, you wouldn't mind sharing screen again, and then we can go to the slide with all the numbers on it, if you don't mind. So before I just open out the full panel, Marcus, if you wouldn't mind, just once we share a screen, you'll see some of the numbers here relating to Horizon projects. So just bear with us while we get that slide up. So
it's the money.
Well, you know, it's look, this is fourth time lucky, but I think it's an interesting learning to know what the contribution is, and that it is quite significant here. So of the projects that are on this call today, which aren't the full list of Irish projects, we're all just Irish projects linked to our advisory board or our partners. So these are all, you know, connected to our network of influence. So, you know, from what you know in the nature-based solutions space, how successful are we, and what are your learnings from that?
Thanks, Tig. I mean, I think there's a few things here. I mean, these projects are linked in terms of the theme is very much in realizing what we're now calling the Green Deal. But when we were starting this journey, it was still just about sustainability. So we were very much, you know, without knowing it, pushing the boundaries and leaning into the European project, the idea. But in terms of the nature-based solutions area, there's two projects, yourself, your GoGreenRoutes, and our Connecting Nature, which is a combined total. Oh, I might start my video. Sorry about that. A combined total of what would you say? Oh, it's well over 22 million euro in projects. That's 2 of 20 funded projects. So basically, you know, we are pretty much in the forefront in Ireland, at least in Irish-led projects, and also in those other 18 projects there are partners who are from the island of Ireland. So we are doing. I take Seán's criticism or his comments quite good. These are competitive grants. You don't just roll out of bed and get one just because you're nice. So you have to compete. You have to compete at the cutting edge, and it's kind of hard when you're trying to deal with a lot of other things at the same time. So I think we've done quite well. I do take his point that we should try harder, and I think when Horizon Europe starts to roll out, we will see significant increase in people applying for these things. But people applying doesn't necessarily equate to people being successful. So, but you can't, you know, the more you lean in, the better chances you have. So I think we are at a very good juncture, would you say, Tig?
Yeah, look, I think it's there's an opportunity, and I think the opportunity is like we in GoGreenRoutes, we wouldn't have come down that this path with ambition and confidence we have without following your footsteps and having you know, great insights from Siobhan, Isabel, Francesco, and others. So I think we say in our project, you never have to work alone, except on the weekend of a due deliverable, right?
Let's not talk about that.
But that's the nature of the work. But I think I think the role of mentorship, the role of a community is really, really important. And today, you know, is probably the first step in that.
I totally agree, Tig. I mean, we're a small island, and there's a certain number of institutions who are going for this. It is pointless us competing with each other at that level. We should be collaborating more. I've always said this, And so, for example, this is how many universities are, like we've got UCD, Trinity, Maynooth, Limerick, sorry if I'm forgetting, we're in the same projects. We may not be the leaders and the larger grant holders, but it's really, really important to collaborate, because we as mentors, we're mentoring the next generation of funding applicants. And so it is our duty not only to deliver on what we've promised to the European Commission in terms of the project deliverables and outcomes and the innovations and so on, but also to bring along the people with us who will then be the next generation. And I really think the strength of all of this, and your slide actually sort of speaks to this a little bit, the strength of this is that the more we have, the more potential we have for further funding at different levels, whether it's large scale or small scale, it doesn't really matter. A funding achievement is a funding achievement. And so by bringing people along and by mentoring, it is in fact, there will be a domino effect, shall we say, over the next, let's say, 8 to 10 years. And I think in about 5, 6, 7 years time, we'll start to see this slide doubling in its value because of that.
Yeah, and just at the seed stage, Marcus, who did you turn to? Was it internal funding? Was Enterprise Ireland? Who supported your seeding of your idea?
Oh, well, I think Mark is on the call here, and I think every one of us would be lost without Enterprise Ireland funding support for these big projects. They have a coordinator grant, but even without that, it is as national contact point, tipping us the nod of what's coming down the line. There's been some great support, not just Enterprise Ireland, but also the Environmental Protection Agency, Alice, and many more people who have involved. But really, a tiny bit of seed funding can amount to a tremendous amount of potential value for the project, but also for the country itself, because you're recruiting people, you're stimulating new positions in universities, new positions in business, new positions in new SMEs. And so in doing that, the net contribution back to the state is many times more than the investment by the seed funders. And I obviously would be pushing for increased seed funding because it acts as a carrot. But it has been invaluable over the years. I mean, speaking on my own behalf anyway, certainly I've been a beneficiary of it, and the result has been some good projects coming into the country. There are people, of course, who receive funding and are not successful in the competitive world that we're in, but that doesn't mean they stop. Your example yourself there, Tig, banging on the door a few times, hit back, knocked down a few times, and then up comes GoGreenRoutes with a big success. So it's I suppose it's a very, very difficult to pick a point in time and say how do we measure our successes and so on. But I think on the continuum, we've been largely good simply because of good talent, lot of energy, and some good supports from the background, including Enterprise Ireland.
Yeah, Mark Sweeney from Enterprise
we
Ireland.
Are here.
I'm going to turn to you now. Is that okay?
Hi, Tig. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, just like to possibly reiterate something that Marcus touched on there, and I've noticed since the beginning since sort of the end of FP7, but into the start of Horizon Europe, what I've seen halfway through the program, and it's great to see, is there has been an increase year on year in terms of the number of participants in the program, and it's something we've been trying to drive. But there is now a critical mass in certain areas, and one of them would be the environmental space. And I'd envisage, as we move forward into the Horizon Europe program and the opportunities that are there, and we will continue to offer these supports, hopefully expand them. We're working on that at the moment, in both in terms of financial and soft supports. But I would envisage, and it is great to see, it's one difference that I have seen from the beginning of the work program to the second half of the work program was universities across Ireland and IoTs across Ireland coalescing and working together, and that brings the opportunity for larger projects. I'm looking at some of the opportunities, whilst they haven't been published, that are upcoming in Horizon Europe, that for the larger projects especially, you need that cooperation, you need that kind of collaboration, and that's good to see. Gone are the days, thank God, where we're looking at, we won't participate in that project because they're targeting this, and I don't want to see that. We're seeing projects in Horizon 2020, and we will see it in Horizon Europe, where you have a large amount of participants from a particular country, and that's not an issue anymore. it really boils down to the, the capabilities and the capacities of the parties that are participating in the projects and the overall nature of the project. So from my own perspective, it's great to see. I just hope it moves forward in the same manner. I see great opportunities in Horizon Europe, where there's a lot of events coming up and will be coming up over the next few months in terms of the launch next week of Horizon Europe, but particularly we're working on events around the clusters in Horizon Europe. So we'll be launching a lot of these. So there's plenty of opportunity. I've seen a lot of comments maybe in terms of a few negative comments, and I can understand them in terms of say citizen science, and it's very hard to get funding. It's very competitive, Horizon Europe. There, but we would be signposted in terms of NCPs. There's a lot of other funding opportunities out there. Funding is it's never easy to get funding, and that's always a difficulty across the board. But maybe if you speak to some of the national contact points or some other, we could possibly direct you to suitable resources out there. So there are plenty there. But I'd be just keen to, in terms of financial supports, and I know it was mentioned just there, in terms of the Green Deal, a lot of large projects in there. So we were kind of flexible with the supports, and I'd be kind of pushing for Horizon Europe that would remain the case. So for quite large projects, and I know Marcus has been involved, yourself, Ty, been involved in quite large projects, and I can understand the difficulties in terms of resources there in putting these applications together. So hopefully I will be able to maintain that flexibility, if not expand it slightly going forward. So we're really looking forward to the new program, and hope you'll all stay involved and continue to participate.
Yeah, and look, on a personal level, I just want to say thanks to you for showing immense confidence, not just in GoGreenRoutes, but in GoGreenNature, which didn't get to stage 2, by the way, but you helped us innovate, and that will help refine our ideas for the future. So I actually think the concept of community is interesting. And as you know, Mark, we have clustered projects, and I'm just going to turn to VARCITIES now, because one of the clustered projects, and this is an acronym that Mark and some others know, it's SC 514 2019, which is the column which we got funded. So that turns out to be your first thought in the morning, by the way, not anything else. But VARCITIES are a sister project. I call them sibling projects. And they have a footprint in Ireland, because they work with the city of Dundalk, and they have partners who are with us here today as well. Abdul, would you like to say hello from CrowdHelix? And you're very welcome.
Hi, thank you very much, Ty. I'd put my hand up because what Seán had written was very, very close to my heart. And I've just seen Siobhan has also added some comments about SMEs. So we're an SME based in Cork and in London as well, and we're partners in VARCITIES, as you mentioned. I think the key thing for SMEs is, and I'm addressing Seán, hopefully this touches, helps in a way, is actually to not bid for these projects on your own, or not to sort of try and randomly go around looking for partners, etc. The way we've been successful is actually identifying the key universities, and this addresses to what Siobhan was saying, is actually tie up with universities that have expertise, and if you can't find them in Ireland, find them across Europe, and let the universities do the heavy lifting, because the success rates in Horizon 2020, for example, are between 8 and 11%, which for an SME is just ridiculous. You might be better off punting €1,000 on a horse. You've got a better chance. But that's not to say don't apply at all, because you can be successful. You just have to have the right strategy, narrow your focus, and identify institutions across Europe, ideally Ireland, and across Europe. In terms of a message to organizational enterprise, Ireland and Mark, the key thing is, and I'm a passionate sort of advocate of this, I think you have to enable the universities, whether via finance, via other ways, to engage with SMEs, and almost give them a bonus if they tag the SME onto projects. And I tried this with the Welsh authority in Cardiff as well, and we're trying to implement that. So universities are huge powerhouses and have huge capacities. I would distract SMEs from bidding for this work. because it's just too much effort, too much. And I think Seán was saying about 70 funding applications rejected. I mean, that's a huge amount of effort. So rather than talk about varsities, and I would like to talk about varsities by another time, I just think as an SME, just work and box smarter, because and hopefully organizations like Mark's can start making those linkages between universities and SMEs much stronger.
Thank you so much. And now what I'd just like it to open up more broadly to the panel. So I'm just going to click screen so I can see almost all of you at once, if you don't mind. So look, we have some a range of projects that are represented here today, and I think it's really interesting. It's really hard to explain the commonality, and given the day that's in it, we've tried to use a shamrock there. And I think the reason we're here today is to make sure that in the future, to address Seán's point, that in the future, it's perhaps better to work together as a community than to put your money on a horse in Cheltenham, to just give an Irish analogy. So I think you know, one of the questions we could ask is, you know, what is unique about some of the Irish projects? And I'm just going to, Karen, I'm going to come to you first. And honestly,
putting me on the spot.
Every time I come into one of your project meetings on the advisory board, I just walk away inspired. And, you know, I have to say, if I put it to you like this, that the people-centric people are at the heart of the projects we're doing, and the capturing of the imagination. One of my PhD students used the word, said we have to capture children in this project. So I call it the Hansel and Gretel idea. She obviously meant to capture children's minds, right, and influence parents. But Karen, the role of citizens capturing their hearts and minds, you know, that's central to your project. And is that born out of philosophy that, you know, you feel is shared across our community?
Oh, there's a lot in that, Tig. Let me just think about that. I mean, what is unique about Irish-led projects? I think that's maybe scale of the country, and we're quite good at networking, because all the projects I've been involved in, I've never worked as a researcher. I've worked as a landscape architecture practitioner in other countries, but never as a researcher. And it has been small networks growing. I mean, Marcus Collier was involved in one of the first projects and Siobhan McQuaid, they were absolutely central, and they went on to lead that. And from that, other projects have evolved. The CCAT project that I'm now involved in, which is Coastal Communities Adapting Together, came out of some of those that actually did their PhDs under an earlier tourist project, which was an FP7 project, and they went on to lead that. So that is that particular aspect. To do with citizens, I may just bring that back to my own background as a landscape architecture. That is people and place. And when you talk about nature, that can be, I find that with nature, you have to sell it to people. That these smart city projects, and it was very interesting to see that statistic of 75% not going on. But I think if they don't get, if there isn't the engagement and the buy-in, that could be one of the problems. But the other point, I was really taken by that comment by Alice Charles, and I wondered that they may not have gone on to another iteration of the original pilot study, because CCAT is a pilot study, but those ideas and concepts may have emerged into different titled projects later on. So I think a sort of statistic like that needs to be looked at, because I know the research projects I've been involved in, they have kind of spawned other projects with different collaborations of people. And of course, with a research project, you bring in young academics, you bring in people doing PhDs, they become postdocs, they go on to lead.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm going to come back to you to talk about virtual reality in a moment. Siobhan, would you like to come in, because you're in that curious position, you know, having been spawned out of a European funded project?
Actually, it's great, and I was actually thinking what's perhaps missing from the Shamrock here, and you know, something that's quite I've noticed in the projects that I've worked with, first of all with Karen on and with Marcus on and the current one now, is that we're very much focused on not just, and I was also surprised with that statistic from Alice Charles, because we're very much focused on practitioners using the results from the project and on producing, translating research, I suppose, into practice. And actually, I'm so glad you asked me, because I have to run in 5 minutes, because we're hosting a landscape architecture webinar, and we've over 200 people from around the globe talking about the results coming out of our project and how we can learn from cities like Limerick and Poznan in Poland, you know, about applying research into practice when it comes to nature-based solutions. But what we have done in our Irish projects that I've been involved in is really been focused on innovation and spin-offs. So we're a spin-off, but we also spun off another company from Turris, and we've already spun off a second company from Connecting Nature. So I think that's really important, is to realise that the impact of these projects in terms of, one, direct enterprises being set up, but secondly, in terms of the impact of the results of these projects. So, you know, from Connecting Nature, we have these communities of practitioners set up, led by enterprise, putting the results, the research into practice. And I think the impact of that, we have nearly 2,000 participants at this stage from practice who are tuning in to listen to the kind of what we're doing and what they can learn from what's coming out of these projects. So there's a massive impact, I think, in terms of, you know, innovation and, you know, really fueling what we call the nature-based economy. So I think we've had a huge impact.
So I think it's fair to say that you've highlighted the shamrock should become a 4-leaf clover now, okay?
Yeah, definitely. And have
I'm all for change and innovation. That's great.
Nature-based enterprises in there and the nature-based economy.
I'm gonna have to change this. Sorry, I'm gonna have to grow some 4-leaf clover. No, I think the nature-based economy is something which is definitely highlighted by your keynotes today. And you know, I think one of the pieces I pick up, and I might just come to Salam Garbia first, is the role of innovation within these projects, because we're in innovation action at VARCITIES and GoGreenRoutes, so we share this common purpose. So what is it that it brought you to have the interest within with the Irish partners and the city of Dundalk? What is the green tint of your project?
Well, in my case, I'll have to, you know, to say first, it's a great initiative here, to like connecting all the PIs at least, and the coordinators, because like personally, I didn't put together the project and started from scratch. You know, I was working at QCD like as a postdoc for a long time, and I remember like Marcus, when he was doing the proposal for Connecting Nature, I was like just started my my postdoc position, freshly graduated from my PhD, and I remember like how hectic, you know, the process was. And then I got involved with Francesco Pilla, like in iSCAPE and then Operandum, and I've got to interact with you know, with the coordinators and see how the process is going on. And definitely this is a key to build that expertise here. And you feel like you're always supported. So you start the conversation with Mark about the project and the concept that you have, and then you start looking at your own circle of supporters that you trust their opinion and make sure that the concept is great before you start, because it's a huge amount of work. And if the concept is not great, then it's not going to go through because it's very competitive. So it has to be innovative, and it has to involve, you know, the SMEs. Like I'm personally, like I believe in SMEs. Like in my project SCORE, which is going to start like in July. It's about increasing climate resilience of European coastal cities using nature-based solutions and smart technologies. So I have 28 partners, and it's €10 million project. And those, I have 10 SMEs out of the 28. 5 of them are leading 5 work packages out of the 10. Okay, so it's what I found dealing with, you know, working with SMEs. They always have great energy. However, you know, maybe very limited expertise in these kind of applications, because sometimes you can have like great idea, but you can't communicate that to the evaluator, then basically you just missed the opportunity. My belief is this is a great initiative, I think, and it's great to put together, I would say like a circle of supporters that we can, a network that we can use to support each other and to support Irish SMEs as well. Now, I have to say, like, it's very rare, like, to see, well, at least in the area that I'm working in, to see, Irish SMEs around. Like the Irish SMEs that I got to work with, it was through Mark. And I just say hi to Mark. So that's basically how we get to contact. Maybe it's great to announce the initiative now and get all the SMEs that are working in the area of the green initiatives and environmental projects to connect also with us, and then that we can basically expand the collaboration in the coming calls. That's my thoughts in terms of the benefits of the SMEs, and
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for sharing. And again, you're welcome. And just to highlight, because we have a press release parallel to this, is we plan to host a meeting at Maynooth University in autumn, boldly, ambitiously saying it's going to be face to face, even if we have to go for a walk beside the canal or on the green campus. Just before we go to the next slide, which is a different set of questions or topics, Mario, you've walked the walk between being an academic at MCAST and innovating with your own SME with EcoStock Innovations, and you've connected to us to different ways with Green Nature Advisory Board for myself, which is a privilege to be part of. I know that this is a busy week. Do you want to just comment on what on that opportunities that being an SME might offer, and how we can work with SMEs in the future?
Hello, Tak. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to see so many projects and so much excellent research going on. So yes, I'm an academic. I've been an academic for a long time now, and the coordinator of the Renature project, which is a Horizon 2020 twinning project led by MCAST in Malta, basically. And there our focus is actually on fostering research, on promoting research. I enjoyed the discussion before when you're talking about Ireland as being an island, and well, it's very much in the same way, well, a bit more actually, because we're a small island. So when I say it's small, it's 316 kilometers squared. But of course, we face a number of environmental challenges. And I think academia and also SMEs at the same time can provide two complementary approaches. So with Renature, Renature is all about collaborations. Renature started off in a discussion with Marcus, so from Ireland, and I think we came up with a project plan together, and then actually built a whole team about some of these central ideas that we talked about. I remember in Tallinn Nature-Based Solutions Summit, you were there as well, Tyke. After that, so I enjoyed discussions about the SMEs also earlier on. The idea of EcoStack Innovations came out, and as a country, Malta, I think also is sort of there's a tradition for universities to go into Horizon 2020 projects, and now also Horizon Europe, and less so for SMEs. And with our current SME, we want to go in that direction where we can sort of be not just the innovators, but bring the innovation to society. Malta is a close-knit space, so it's a small place, everyone knows each other, so I think we also offer an opportunity to bring new solutions to our policymakers, to our stakeholders out there, and that is what we're doing in Renature. We've built a cluster of nature-based solutions, and we have practitioners from the environment to planning to business and so on, and I think that's an advantage, because now also through an SME, through a GoGreenRoutes projects, we will try to continue this discussion, this collaboration. And in fact, as Tyke is aware, and also maybe some others, we've brought a city in Xera in GoGreenRoutes, and this is also something that we tend to do. So the SME is there to bring the innovation to others who may not normally apply to a Horizon 2020 or a Horizon Europe project.
Yeah, look, thanks so much, and I do look forward to traveling in a most sustainable possible way to Malta. I might have to kayak, but we'll come to that discussion another day.
That's great.
Thanks so much. Look, there are areas in which, you know, which are emerging, and I think some of you are aware there's specific calls where we're obviously targeting in Horizon Europe based on preliminary information, but in general, these are some of the kind of global challenges and wicked problems we're looking at. And I'm just going to turn to you, Lorraine, first, if you don't mind. You know, I think, you know, your role within Diamonds, your role within GoGreenRoutes, which is evolving, I have to say, is, you know, how can we address some of those important issues which are key to Diamond and take some of that knowledge for GoGreenRoutes, and how will that help us future-proof applications so that, you know, they continue to address these issues around inclusion, diversity, and gender?
Yeah, so like the Diamond Project, for anyone who's not familiar, is about equity and inclusion in public transport systems, or transport systems in general. And I suppose, you know, listening to this conversation, it's what has really struck me is that, look, we're all talking about the human is at the center of everything that we're talking about. And, like, you know, determinants of behavior, no matter what the setting, you know, is what we're interested in. So I think that there's always like a really interesting knowledge sharing around that. The things that we may find in one setting are translated to another setting, which might enlighten another piece of research because we may not have thought about it in that context. And it's interesting in relation to gender and transport and safety has been a major issue over the last week. And the discourse that has like come on in social media and in media in general of this just not appreciating the fact that this was a consideration for 51% of the global population, that how we haven't planned our cities, our neighborhoods, our transport systems to be equitable and, you know, and including women in systems. And I suppose my time in sports science, I was always struck by it, that, you know, the default male, and like we're now, you know, seeing even more of this, you know, highlighted to us, and it's there in transport systems. But to echo what loads of people have been saying today, it's I think our uniqueness in Ireland, and we're probably not as unique as we think we are, but our networking ability. And, you know, in Ireland, we're, you know, with 2 degrees of separation. Globally, it might be 6 degrees of separation, but in Ireland, it's 2. And, you know, and the interdisciplinarity of a lot of our work, because again, with funding proposals over the years, we've had to be creative in how we've framed things that we want to research into calls, which has opened our networks. And, you know, there's been a lot of cross-fertilization there, and, you know, and dissemination is important. It's really important that we share the findings, and in a way that people can relate with how applicable it is for their work and for what they're thinking, and putting another frame or perspective or veil on our perceptions of what's important to our disciplinary areas. And all, like, and finally, just to say that again, another experience in Ireland is the willingness that local authorities, SMEs, and particularly, like, you know, government in relation to reaching out to us to find out how should we be moving forward. Traditionally, there was a very, well, this is how it is, and that's not, you know, so we're just going to fix the problem as we see it. And it's been great to see a greater diversity and consideration.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that point that, you know, we can actually influence government. Like, we have a capacity at some level through different processes to influence EPA policy. And I think we have that, you know, knock on the door capacity, which Mario might say that, you know, probably exists in Malta as well. I think the capacity for us to influence policy and try things out is definitely an opportunity that we have, which may not exist in some larger European states. And thanks to those, I appreciate some of you have to go. I was going to turn to you, Brenda, next, if you'd like to comment. what we've been discussing here.
Yeah, hi, thanks.
Hi.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. What topic areas can we have the greatest impact? I suppose coming from a more critical background as someone who looks at media and cultural around the environmental question, the first thing that would strike me there would be impact for who, impactful for who. And I think that's really important. And I think from our different disciplines, we carry an implicit assumption there about who we're talking about a little bit more. Impactful across our peers, impactful for funders, impactful for society. These are slightly, different agendas. So I think all these areas can have greatest impact if we work in an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary way. And this is the thing that I suppose I've learned the most about recently in my work with the CCAT team, is how do we do that interdisciplinarity? How do we do that transdisciplinarity? And I suppose this is going off topic a little, but what I think is the greatest impact will be when we bring that into our projects. But how do we do that? And I think maybe starting some conversations about the challenges and how we try and have those cross-disciplinary discussions will lead to the greatest and most impactful research, is how I'd address that. In terms of society, I have to say that I think doing research that's currently in the social mind, or currently, of concern to citizens, can be most impactful. So, for example, what Lorraine has just discussed there in terms of gender and safety issues, this is on the public mind at the moment. Well-being, mental health, and nature. So we're in tandem with the social conversation. So that's quite difficult. How do you create research in advance of a social conversation almost? But within those projects, I think there's always flexibility to reframe your project and respond to the current moment. So having a little bit more flexibility in our thinking and not being too dogmatic perhaps, and considering the social context as we're working along, rather than our own particular interest to achieve A, B, and C perhaps, would be something to think about it.
I actually think that's lovely, because anybody who works within GGR, GoGreenRoutes, knows flexibility is both a double-edged sword, but more opportunity than anything else. And I'll give you an example of that. So we have more than 20 PhDs or researchers on the project who are doing who are in the early career researcher designated bracket, whatever that might mean. And some of them ask is, when I graduate, what will I be called? Will I become, an expert in health promotion, physical activity, psychologist, physiologist, applied physiologist, ecologist, horticulturist? It's actually hard to explain, because what they're going to be is a sustainability scientist. Ideally, the word innovation goes with that, right? So we're trying to, ensure that the next gen aren't nerds like me who only come late in the game to the concepts of innovation, and that innovation and that flexibility is part of how we think. And I think that takes us into the transdisciplinary space. And look, my knowledge of CCAT tells me how flexible CCAT have been, both in terms of coping with COVID-related restrictions regarding some of the activities, but also innovating with virtual reality, and that's something that's also part of our project. So I've seen that at first hand. So look, well done to CCAT on being able to turn a threat into an opportunity. We just might go to the. I'm just going to go to Isabel, if you don't mind.
Yes, hi Tig, how
Hi,
are
Isabel.
you? I have to say, really interesting and stimulating discussion here this afternoon. I'm not quite sure where to begin. I think Brenda's point there around that social construct and aligning ourselves more, I suppose, flexibly with that. And I think we're seeing that in GoGreenRoutes, and we're seeing it to some extent in Connecting Nature as well, where we very quickly had to adapt how we do things and what our plans were to take account of the situation that we find ourselves in. And out of that has come great opportunity, I think, for us, just like both in terms of the research outputs that are coming out, but in terms of the innovations as well, so I think, yeah, that ability to adapt, not to be afraid of failure as well. You know, I mean, because that's what innovation is about. And, you know, we are going to try things out, and, you know, even though they may not progress beyond the, you know, the next stage, there's always learning. There's learning by doing, there's learning from experience, and there's learning, you know, where you went wrong and how you can adapt. So I think that's the important thing, that even though, you know, some of our innovations may not succeed, but, you know, there's great learning to come from that. And I think the other point really is the communicating what we're doing and disseminating and getting those messages out to the key audiences, and creating that awareness is vitally important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I take the point about the capacity to fail. I mean, it's not failure if you're learning.
No.
Bear in mind, I did work as a sports psychologist for Munster Rugby in their least successful era. So maybe don't listen to me when I say that. But I like the idea that we have this ability to share that voice. And I think that's something we can do. And maybe what we can do is within the Academy cluster in Go Green, we can invite members of the other projects which are now connected with us to present and share some of their innovations, because I think the messages today are too important. They resonate too clearly for us to lose those voices. And we're just going to go to the next slide, and I can give context to the last quote, which was, you know, from Mary Robinson about, you know, the moonshot of our generation is dealing with climate change and solving the wicked problems therein. And I think, look, we actually have a Mars lunar vehicle, you know, getting rock samples probably as we speak. So let's just say there's a degree of optimism with that. Terry, I might turn to you for a moment. Terry, could you just give us a hint at how a field like psychology has awoken to the challenge of climate change and to the greater societal challenges, and kind of had to, you know, redefine itself, or is in the process of redefining itself?
Yeah, it's interesting, Tig. I mean, psychology is a very strange discipline, because it has within it a whole load of divisions, and division is an interesting word. And they tend not to talk to each other very much. And when I was the CEO of the Psychological Society of Ireland, it took all I had to get the clinical and the counselling people in the same room with each other. Anyway, that aside, I'm part of a global alliance, the Psychology Global Alliance for Climate Change, which was initiated back in Lisbon in 2019 when we could go somewhere. So that's got 60 to 70 psychological associations around the world meeting regularly to look at climate. And so one of the things that's really important is, you know, and Seán Kelly mentioned the idea of collaboration, and global collaboration is really important. It's a global issue. It's an existential threat. And it needs all the thinking that we can get to come to terms with it. I think psychology can have, instead of apologizing for itself and for its existence, it can actually enable governments, leaders, national organizations and global corporations to shift their mindset, to shift their behavior, and either doing it through, and not by, you know, sort of demonstrating or anything, but by you know, explaining and talking about how culture change takes place, how behavior change takes place, and having an influence and an impact that way. And I think also, I mean, certainly I'm an organizational business psychologist, so I can see a huge role for that group of psychologists to look at transforming systems, big systems and large corporations. So I think there's huge opportunity here. And I think there's, you know, there's a lot of energy and a lot of activity going on around the world, but we need to bring it together, which is what the Alliance is trying to do. And it's great to be part of the GoGreenRoutes collaborative effort, because I can bring some of that learning into this space as well.
Thanks so much, Terry, who is today proving to be a daily marathon, because you were part of our work package leads call this morning as well. Thank you so much. Can I just turn to you, Elaine, because we've mentioned climate change and flooding, and you've got a particular perspective on this from your project. And do you think that the learning from your project, you know, can influence how we work with citizens in future research?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things that has really become clear during this project that I'm working on is the fact that there are very knowledgeable local people and that we shouldn't overlook that. And often in these type of situations, a bottom-up approach is obviously going to be a lot more effective than maybe a top-down. I've been working with farmers, and, you know, as the custodians of the land, they literally know the lay of the land and what works and what doesn't work, as opposed to maybe a one-size-fits-all solution that might be a good idea of somebody in Dublin or in the government that maybe doesn't understand, you know, the generational knowledge that farmers actually have within the community, and beyond farmers, other residents as well. And different things will obviously work in different places. And I think we really need to be kind of aware of that and take it on board. Also, you know, you touched on mental health previously as well. There are mental health impacts of extreme weather events, quite severe ones, you know, and again, going back to the farmers, you know, their farms are tied up both with their home life and with their livelihood. So when flooding impacts on them, it hits them in several ways, and often there can be a division between rural and urban, or farmers and normal residential people. And maybe we need to try and find ways to promote a shared identity and work on the things that people have a shared connection with, rather than creating divisions in these type of scenarios.
Elaine, I'm just going to push you on one point. Is, you know, recently we discussed the issue is what is environmental psychology. Now, as a future course director at Maynooth University of a master's program in this area, what should environmental psychology be, and has that changed?
I think of late it has become more to the fore. It is a relatively new discipline. It's only about 50 or 6 years old, you know, and I mean, it's not even recognized. The BPS or ourselves here, we don't have a division for environmental psychology. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed for it to be taken seriously. You know, I think Terry said about a psychologist being apologetic. Well, if psychologists are apologetic, I don't know what environmental psychologists are, you know, because it is kind of seen as a half, you know, it's not taken fully seriously because it's so subjective, because it's not as black and white as other areas. It can be overlooked as less solid and less reliable, I suppose. So I think we really need to make sure that the measurements and the tools that we're using are really good, that they're effective, and that we can validate them and ensure that they're reliable, you know, through repeat use of them. But yeah, I think it has a huge role to play, obviously, particularly now, and particularly in light of COVID, where we see that actually people can change their behavior dramatically. But now we just need to get them to do that with the environment in mind as well.
Thanks so much. And look, you know, arguably our research is not across all of us here is not black or white. Hopefully it's green, and we can see the different hues within that. Just if you don't mind, a final comment from those of you that are left on the panel. I'm going to try keep you. I was going to say 3 words, but I'll be kind. I'll say 1 sentence. It's probably I'm going to just ask you to focus on, you know, what's your take-home thought right now, if you had prepared one, or how do we work together in a more aligned, and I guess with the sense of Irishness as I look forward to eating my salad later. How do we work together? I'll go to you, Lorraine, first. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, I think open discourse and engaged dissemination. I think this, the wider we spread our word, the better we'll all be able to work together.
Thanks so much. Salam?
Yeah, well, I think the key issue is, again, like communication. So be informed about all the events from all the projects and try to participate as much as possible. So we know exactly where to collaborate and how.
Thank you so much. Mario?
For me, it's transdisciplinarity. We've been hearing so much about digital cities, smart cities, green cities, and for this we need transdisciplinarity. We need to work across disciplines.
Thank you so much. Elaine, I'll just come back to you and they go to Terry.
Yeah, I think it's important to focus on what things connect us and increase solidarity and shared identity to help reduce divisions and conflict and getting things done.
Terry, the penultimate word to you.
Okay, I think it's really important to encourage diversity of thinking, because I think the more perspectives you bring to an issue, the better the outcome.
Well, I have to say it's hard to top that, so I won't. I'll just recount a quote that I gave earlier for a press release. Because what I see here today is actually the democratization of research and innovation. Just to hint, we haven't given titles except for the Member of European Parliament, because that's a very designated title. I think we have a relatively flat hierarchy across our project, and hearing so many voices and voices of experience, voices of enthusiasm, I've certainly had my eyes opened and found this an enriching experience. So thanks to all of you, the panelists who gave so much today, to our two esteemed speakers as well. Ballanty Law Fail of Farg, so happy St. Patrick's Day. And as you know, time in Ireland means something else. So this is actually part of what we call Seachtain na Gaeilge, which technically means a week, but that actually lasts 17 days. So if we went a little bit over time, you'll appreciate why. So thanks so much to everybody for their participation today, and look forward to meeting you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Bye-bye.
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 Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Slán.